Let me ask you something. Have you ever had an idea that wouldn't leave you alone? Not because it was safe, not because it was smart, but because deep down, it felt right. The kind of idea that scares you, because if you follow it, there's no going back. Yeah, this story starts right there. Because before Nike was a logo, before it was a billion-dollar empire, before it was stitched onto the dreams of athletes around the world, it was just a nervous 24-year-old kid, with no plan, no money, and a crazy idea he probably shouldn't have chased. And if you've ever felt behind in life, uncertain, or quietly terrified that you're wasting your potential, wait till you hear this. Phil Knight didn't grow up dreaming of building Nike. He wasn't some loud, confident visionary who walked into rooms and commanded attention. He was shy, introspective, awkward. He liked running. He liked solitude. And after graduating from Stanford Business School in 1962, he did what a lot of smart people do when they don't know what they want. He panicked. The safe path was obvious: accounting, corporate life, predictable paycheck. But something inside him resisted. So instead of committing to a life he didn't want, he committed to an idea he didn't fully understand. Here was the thought that changed everything. What if Japanese running shoes could do to German shoes what Japanese cameras did to German cameras? That was it. No spreadsheets forecasting global domination. No master plan. Just curiosity. And here's the first mindset shift that built Nike. You don't need certainty to start. You just need curiosity strong enough to beat fear. Phil borrowed a small loan from his father. Not millions, not venture capital. Just enough to buy a plane ticket. He flew to Japan, walked into a shoe factory, and did something wildly uncomfortable. He pretended to be bigger than he was. He introduced himself as the owner of Blue Ribbon Sports, a company that didn't really exist yet. And somehow, it worked. He secured a distribution deal with Onitsuka Tiger. No office, no employees, no warehouse, just shoes and belief. Back in the US, he didn't launch with a bang. He sold shoes out of the trunk of his green Plymouth Valiant at track meets. Imagine that for a second. A Stanford MBA, selling shoes from his car. Sweaty runners walking by, some stopping, most ignoring him. Not glamorous, not Instagram-worthy, but that's the point. Nike wasn't built in moments of confidence. It was built in moments of quiet persistence. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Phil Knight was almost always anxious. He worried constantly about money, about failure, about disappointing his father. He wasn't fearless. He was afraid and moving. That's the second mindset shift. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's deciding fear doesn't get the final vote. But here's where the story really gets interesting. Because most people think success comes from individual brilliance. Nike didn't. It came from misfits. Phil started collecting people who didn't quite fit anywhere else. Former runners, oddballs, obsessives. He called them the butt faces. And yeah, that tells you a lot. They argued, they yelled, they disagreed violently. But they were united by belief. Bill Bowerman, his old track coach, was obsessed with one thing: performance. Not profits, not branding, performance. This was the man who poured rubber into his wife's waffle iron just to experiment with better shoe soles. Most people would have laughed. Bowerman didn't care. Because the mindset here was simple. If you're not obsessed with making the product better, nothing else matters. Nike didn't start as a business. It started as a mission to make running better. And that belief created momentum. But don't romanticize it too much. Because right after this, everything starts falling apart. Banks don't trust Phil. Cash runs dry. Bills pile up. And bankruptcy starts knocking on the door. For years. But that's the next chapter. And trust me, this is where the real mindset that built Nike reveals itself. For most people, this is where the story would have ended. Right here. When the banks stop smiling. When the phone stops ringing. When the numbers don't add up, no matter how many times you stare at them. Because for nearly 12 years, Nike, then still Blue Ribbon Sports, Wasn't successful. It was surviving. Barely. And here's the part nobody likes to talk about. Phil Knight didn't feel like a visionary during those years. He felt like a fraud. Every dollar that came in went straight back out. Inventory, shipping, manufacturing. There was no cushion, no safety net. The company lived on what Knight called a low-equity model, which is a polite way of saying, if one thing goes wrong, we're dead. Banks hated this. They saw Phil as reckless, irresponsible, a walking liability. Meetings with bankers felt like interrogations, and the pressure wasn't just financial. Phil had employees now. Families depended on him. Imagine lying awake at night, knowing you might not make payroll. Again. This is where most people quit. Not because they lack talent, but because the emotional cost becomes unbearable. And this brings us to the third mindset that built Nike. Endurance beats brilliance. Phil Knight wasn't the smartest guy in the room. He wasn't charismatic. He wasn't fearless. But he could endure. He kept going when it stopped being fun, when it stopped being exciting, when it became heavy. And let's be honest for a second. This is the phase nobody posts about. There's no applause for endurance, no dopamine hit, just quiet suffering. And here's the paradox. The same traits that made Knight anxious made him careful, persistent, detail-oriented. His weakness became his strength. But then, just when things seemed fragile, they got worse. The relationship with Onitsuka Tiger, the Japanese company supplying their shoes, started to collapse. Suddenly, the company that made Blue Ribbon Sports possible became its biggest threat. Onitsuka tried to cut them out, to go around them, to take control of their market. Phil was cornered. And this is the moment where Nike was truly born, because desperation forces clarity. He had two choices, fold or leap. He chose the leap. And it wasn't elegant. He needed a new brand, a new name, a new identity. He wanted to call it Dimension 6. Yeah, really. Thankfully, his team saved him from that disaster. One of the butt faces, Jeff Johnson, had a dream. In it, a word appeared. Nike. The Greek goddess of victory. Short, sharp, powerful. Phil didn't love it, but he didn't need to, because this mindset mattered more. You don't have to love the first version. You just have to let it grow. Then came the logo. A design student named Carolyn Davidson was paid $35 to create it. The swoosh. Phil's response? I don't love it, but I think it'll grow on me. That line alone should comfort anyone stuck in perfectionism. Nike didn't start perfect. It started unfinished. And yet, something changed. Because now, the company wasn't just selling shoes. It was fighting for survival, which gave it an edge. The team rallied. Bowerman's waffle iron sole became a hit. Athletes started paying attention. Still broke, still stressed, but moving forward. And here's the most important mindset shift of all. Nike was built by people who refused to stop moving, even when the path disappeared. Phil Knight didn't wait for confidence. He didn't wait for approval. He didn't wait for certainty. He waited for momentum. And momentum only comes after action, even imperfect action, especially imperfect action. But there's a cost to this kind of life, and Phil paid it. Missed moments, strained relationships, loneliness at the top long before there even was a top.
Because leadership is isolating, and the higher you go, the quieter it gets. But the breakthrough, the moment when everything changes, it doesn't come from comfort. It comes from commitment. And that's exactly what happens next. Because after years of chaos, Nike finally gets its shot. And when it does, nothing is ever the same again.
Here's the lie we're all sold. That success announces itself. That one day, everything just clicks. The money flows, the stress disappears, the doubts vanish. That's not what happened to Nike. Because even when things started working, they were still barely holding together. Nike didn't explode overnight. It crept forward, one athlete at a time, one race at a time, one risk at a time. And this is where Phil Knight made a decision that changed everything. He stopped trying to sell shoes and started spreading a belief. Phil hated selling. He was awkward, uncomfortable. He didn't want to pitch. But when he talked about running, something shifted. Because he wasn't selling anymore, he was sharing conviction that running made people better, stronger, more alive. And that belief became contagious. Here's the mindset shift that matters. People don't buy products. They buy belief systems. Nike wasn't competing with Adidas on specs. They were competing on identity. If you wore Nike, you weren't just a runner. You were someone chasing something. And slowly, that message caught fire. But make no mistake, the pressure never left. Nike was still drowning in debt, still fighting lawsuits, still clashing with banks. At one point, Phil Knight was literally battling the US government over tariffs that could have destroyed the company. Again. Every time it looked like Nike had made it, another wall appeared. And this brings us to one of the most important lessons from Shoe Dog. Growth demands chaos. If your life feels messy while you're building something meaningful, you're probably doing it right. Because stability comes after expansion, not before. Phil Knight didn't build Nike in peace, he built it in tension. And then came the moment that validated everything. Nike decided to go public. The IPO. The finish line, right? Not exactly. Because here's what Phil Knight admits, quietly, honestly. The money didn't change him. What changed him was survival, the years of doubt, the nights of fear, the burden of responsibility. By the time Nike went public in 1980, he had already paid the price. And this is the part nobody prepares you for. The win doesn't erase the scars, it just proves they were worth it. Phil became a multi-millionaire overnight, but his reflection wasn't triumph, it was exhaustion, relief, and something else. Gratitude. For the people who stayed, for the team that argued, fought, laughed, and endured, for the journey itself. Because here's the final mindset that built Nike. The journey is the reward, not the exit, not the applause, not the money, the process, the becoming. Phil Knight ends Shoe Dog with a warning to the dreamers, the rebels, the builders. If you succeed, you will become a target. The more visible you get, the more resistance you attract. It's not if, it's when. But then he says this, just keep going. That's it. Not hustle harder, not outwork everyone. Just keep going. Even when you're scared, even when you're unsure, even when no one claps, especially then. Because the mindset that built Nike isn't about shoes. It's about faith without guarantees, belief without proof, action without certainty. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If you want a life most people don't have, you'll have to live years most people won't tolerate.
uncertainty, pressure, loneliness, but also meaning, purpose, momentum. So if you're in that phase right now, the messy middle, the invisible grind, the part where nothing feels secure, you're not behind. You're building. And if this story hit home, don't just scroll past it. Subscribe. Because this channel isn't about shortcuts. It's about mindsets that last. And remember, crazy ideas don't need permission. They just need persistence.